Hi and welcome. I'm Jeremy Allison and I'm talking today to Mr. Chris DiBona, who is the Open Source Programs Manager for Google. Welcome, Chris.
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Well, so Chris and I have known each other a long time, and he's actually my boss, so this is kind of a weird interview, but hopefully you'll bear with it. So Chris, can you tell me about the exciting things in open source and free software over the past year?
No.
Well, as I said, well, this is going to be a very short interview. So why don't we start with the lawsuits?
The reason we decided to start with the lawsuits is because we can't really talk about them much. As the people who are likely to be deposed and have been working on it, we kind of don't have the liberty to talk about the Oracle lawsuits or the other ones that might be coming after some of our open source projects. So my apologies. I wish I could talk more about them, but it's inappropriate to. So.
Okay, so let's not talk about the lawsuits. And so let's taking that subject away. So how about some of the major open source releases that Google has done over the past year? Why don't you tell us about some of those?
So I'm going to start with a small project that I just really liked that we launched this year, and that was GoogleCL, which wasn't really a traditional open source project. So in my mind, there's different kinds of projects that are open source. They're the ones that interact with Google and require Google to exist. And so they're not really as open source as, say, something like Android or Chrome, which don't need Google to exist for them to be successful and for people to use them. But from the category of ones that work with Google services, it's probably GoogleCL is my favorite. But for just what I consider traditional open source that anyone can take, adopt, and do with as they please, within the boundaries of the license, of course, would be Android, and then after that, Chrome. But we release a lot of software, so I feel bad almost saying any one project is my favorite because we released probably a little over 100 projects this year.
Wow.
So.
So I mean, where do we actually keep track of all the things that we released? Where could somebody go to say, what did Google release in 2010?
So for a day-to-day sort of tracking, the blog, we usually blog about almost all of our releases. They're all, of course, up on the web on code.google.com, and so they're all there. We're trying to re-architect the open source site on code.google.com so it's a little more clear what we've released. But we've sort of had a problem of success in that we've released so many things that we used to have just a simple list and that was enough, but now that list is tens of pages long.
Yeah.
Hundreds of pages long because it's about 900 projects over the last 6 years. So it gets really hard to find things. And the reality is also some of those projects are dead. They're old and they're not useful anymore. They pertain to versions that aren't out there anymore and used by the average sort of computer person. So probably a fifth of those projects have faded out in importance. But still, there's a lot of good code out there. So we've probably released about 20 million lines of code. Probably more than that. I mean, because every time we do an Android release, it's like another million lines of code, just an iterative change, in addition of features and that kind of thing. So it's quite staggering.
So Android is pretty interesting.
Here's my Android Nexus S.
The new Android phone.
Yeah, so it's quite lovely.
Yeah. Android's pretty interesting because everyone for years has been saying, well, this is going to be the year of the Linux desktop, or will this be the year of the Linux desktop? So, do you think Android might actually make that dream come true?
So, I think that the reality is most people who will watch this video don't consider Android a Linux desktop. Don't consider it. I mean, it's certainly a Linux. Really is. Well, it's really a very consumer-friendly way of doing computing, right? So from that perspective, yes, it's a desktop and it runs Linux, and that's pretty exciting. But it really ships on phones and now on tablets with things like the Samsung Galaxy Tab and those sorts of devices. So I don't know that it's really a desktop, but we're in this funny world now where everything is sort of changing. Right?
Yeah.
And people are really moving away from, the concept of a box under a desk attached to a screen and getting input into the internet of the world,
Yeah.
If you watch what people do with these tablets and do with these phones, you realize very quickly they're a Bluetooth keyboard away from the levels of productivity that they enjoyed with a desktop machine, right? So what does that mean, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to assign grand meaning to things. I'm not...
Oh, well, let me do that. I'm really good at that.
You are?
Yeah, sure.
When did you start being good at that?
I've been a talking head for ages.
You're a head now.
Well, just a
sort of a
talking
different
head.
part of the
So
animal.
so why Android is important? I think we're seeing the death of the traditional desktop machine sitting under the desk. I think
that's true, actually.
I think in the next 5 years, the only people using that kind of box are going to be the programmers, the people who have massive amounts of data entry who need to use a keyboard. And most people will...
I always miss keyboards, though, even when I use larger screen.
Well, just
input,
use the Android projection of your keyboard on the desk, like in
Oh,
Tron.
I tried those laser projector keyboards. They're very hard to use. There was a Bluetooth one that was produced a couple of years back, and they're not very good. But actual touchscreen ones are quite okay.
Yeah.
For very short mails. But I also find myself... I mean, it's funny because, if you think about Twitter and an iPad, Twitter and an Android keyboard are a perfect match because you don't want to write anything longer than 140 characters anyways on these keyboards.
And remember, you and I are old. And
that's true. That's true.
Relatively speaking. And so
the
many of the the kids today will come up with
I can't picture typing 120 words a minute on an iPad touchscreen. I just can't picture it, and that's even with really awesome predictive text and type ahead sort of technologies that you see, which I think they've done quite well on Android, thank you.
But the other thing that people will do is talk to them.
Right, but
and
the
have
density,
that transcribed.
The density of voice conversations is very, very low. They could read the entire transcript of this interview in probably a 30th of the time that it will take for them to watch it. So it's not that we don't respect your time, it's just this is a fun way of doing, informative video,
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, we'll have to agree to disagree.
Well, I don't think that I'm disagreeing with you. I just think that, I think that people who write more find keyboards more useful. So maybe the answer is Bluetooth keyboards everywhere, right? But who knows?
And I think people don't write as much as you think they do. Most people use computers to actually receive things rather than write. The amount of writing that most people do on these devices, that's actually quite low. Anyway, let's change subject to something else I think was really exciting this year. I'd love to talk about, and that's an open video protocol for the web.
Yes.
So WebM or WebM or how do you pronounce that?
It's WebM.
WebM, okay.
But it's also WebP. It's the single picture version of that as well. So WebM for the viewer is very possibly what you're watching this on. If you're using Chrome and you're on the HTML5 site of YouTube, you're watching WebM. And actually even Flash can play it now, I think, but I'm not sure. So, it could be very well how they're consuming this right now. And it's basically a codec for video that's actually very, very good at streaming as well. So it's as good, if not better, than H.264 in a lot of situations. It's only worse in a couple of small situations. But when it comes to network streaming, it's way more efficient. And it's very, very clever on how it does, the rebuilding of streams in the event of a dropout, and it's very clever. And so we bought a company by the name of On Technologies about 2 years ago that was working on what was called at the time VP9 in-house, and they'd already released VPs 2 through 8. So they had a long history in this codec space, and so we picked them up and we said, let's keep shipping, let's get it out there, and let's open source it and release with it a patent grant that would allow open source developers to know that if they used this way of encoding and decoding video, that they not have to accumulate new pricing. They wouldn't have to worry about licensing patents from other patent holders, and so that's what we did. And so far, we think it's been pretty successful. So,
for people who may not know, one of the problems with video streaming and codecs on free software is that it's been patent encumbered in the past, which meant it's very difficult for open source free software to actually write, even though the code itself is not that hard, it's very hard to actually write them and legally redistribute them. And WebM hopefully will be an answer to those problems. The other thing is, of course, Chrome. So can you talk a little bit about the success of Chrome?
So for the viewers who care about open source, they probably care most about Chromium, right? So Chromium being the open source componentry of Chrome, because Chrome is Chromium plus some close stuff from Flash and PDF and that kind of thing. So. Which we don't have the rights to distribute, but we want to be able to include in the package because we can protect it with our process model and present it to the user in such a way that one plugin can't crash all the tabs and things that are important to us.
Yeah.
So but Chromium is pretty remarkable. We took the public source, the public project, the open source project WebKit, and we combined it with a new JavaScript virtual machine that we wrote from scratch called V8 from our team in Ars, up in, I think, Scandinavia. So yeah, definitely up in Scandinavia. Yeah. So we put those together and we created what at the time, and actually I think still is, the fastest browser out there. And more importantly, one that does really, really good things around process separation and plug-in process separation and tab separation, so that one tab can't bring down your whole browser, and so that it can be this really great secure computing environment for people to use on the web. Additionally, it ties into our malware APIs, so that you know when you're about to go to a site that is insufficiently secured. And those malware APIs, by the way, are open to any browser to use, and many of them use it. I think Safari uses it, so does Opera, and a couple of others, although I'm not positive about Opera. I've been running it a while. So, in a lot of ways, Chrome is our way of saying this is how we feel that browsing should be online. And I think we've been very successful at that. I think we're hovering at around 10% of all web browsers now.
Wow.
Which is great. But more importantly, when we open sourced it, we open sourced it under the BSD license, which was consumable by anyone. Microsoft, Apple, Firefox, you name it. Anyone can start with Chrome components, parts, and add them to their greatness, as it were. So if Firefox likes what we've done, they can use our code. And we talk to them sometimes. They're still our friends, even though that's sort of an unusual area.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a competing product now.
But it's it's not like Firefox is a bad project. It's great.
No, I mean it's my primary browser.
Your default, right?
I still use it. Yeah.
So it's like but Chromium it made a very important point about speed though when we released it.
Yeah.
Because we felt that people were insufficiently focused on the speed of their web browsing and rendering, so we spent extra time on that task, and we still do. So if you look at how the team does its releases and the things that they think are important, it really comes down to preserving the speediness of the browser almost above all else except for security, and that's pretty exciting for me. So.
And then the other thing that was just announced that started to shipping was the Chrome OS Netbook.
Yes.
So maybe you can tell us a little about that.
It's funny. It's sitting right inside there. I could go get it. It's actually pretty nice. They did a really nice job on the hardware. So it's very much a Chrome OS specific piece of hardware. Chrome OS, it's very much here's your web view into the world, right? So there's nothing extraneous to the operating system. But because of that, I have to be honest with you, the nice thing about it, and this comes as someone who's used any manner of platforms and continues to use any manner of platforms day to day, is I know that my Chrome OS laptop is not owned. It's not stuck with malware. It's not been compromised in any way, shape, or form. It's a very secure computing environment. And especially since I'm so very close to Google services, I know that I have a computing environment that I can trust. And that's very hard to say if you're running an operating system and maintaining it yourself. So this is one of the sad realizations of the last 5-6 years of mine. It's not that I'm a poor sysadmin. It's that the actual number of people who I would consider trustworthy enough to administer a machine has dramatically dropped. So knowing what I know about how we administer our machines here at Google, and knowing how Chrome OS is architected, and how we've exposed that code via open source, I know I can trust it in ways I could really only trust Linux desktops before, and Linux servers before.
And I mean, even Linux desktops and servers, I mean, you have the auto updates, but there's a lot of code there. Essentially, everybody is running the equivalent of a mainframe from the 1970s on their desk and on their phone.
Linux is
and that's
very
the same
secure,
is true for Windows.
Right? So,
the same is true for Windows in that,
to a lesser degree, yes.
Well,
I think the Windows 7 is more secure than Windows XP, but I still think.
But I mean, the
Linux
fundamental
machines,
architecture of Windows is very similar.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. I think the fundamental architecture of Linux is inherently more secure, but also its lack of popularity helps it a lot too. So I think that owning a Linux box is harder, strictly from a browser.
It also has some security technologies like SE Linux and AppArmor built in.
I wrote that article about SE Linux about 8 years ago for Linux Magazine, right? The policy-based, the problem with SE Linux is it can be very complex to administer.
Oh,
and
yes.
so most people, frankly, are not up to it, and that leads to the problem of what happens when people have secure infrastructure that they actually don't administer. It actually is insecure.
Yes.
Right. So I think that the standard Linux security model is both secure and administrable. So that's pretty exciting. I think the Windows security model is administrable, kind of, by those who are experienced with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm hoping people accept the default security settings that come with Windows 7, right?
Yeah.
And actually, the funny thing is, in some ways, Mac is the worst of both worlds, right? I don't think that people know how to administer security on Macs, and I don't think there's a lot of knowledge out there, and I don't think it's being kept up with at Apple. So, which is a little harsh to say, especially in a public venue. But there's some bugs that have been out there for 2-3 years that they're not addressing. So now that said, Macs are not nearly the target that Windows machines are. So that's good for them.
Well, but they're becoming more so.
They're very
these
popular.
days.
Yeah.